I wanted to do a video about masculinity, but if you're not a man, don't turn off, because it's not just relevant to men. It's going to be relevant to women. It's going to be relevant to anybody who works with men in any capacity, teachers, people in mental health. It's going to be relevant to parents, because there's been a lot of talk in the last few months or years about mental health, and a lot of that talk has been about how men struggle to access support for their mental health because they struggle to accept that they have issues. And there's been a lot of articles written, a lot of studies written, a lot of media coverage trying to encourage men to reach out. But in those studies and in those articles is an insinuation that what we struggle with is inherent in us. It's biological. It's something that we're born with. And I just wanted to flip that around today and say, what if it isn't? What if it isn't biological? What if it's social? Because if a man or a boy goes through their lives thinking, well, this is how I am because this is how everybody expects me to be, and therefore I can't change, then we can never expect boys and men to start to reach out and to access those services that are there to help them and to access those emotions within them if we never teach them that that's okay to do. So I wanted to read you some statistics which I found really scary. Boys are 3 times more likely than girls to be suspended from school, 4 times more likely to have behavioural difficulties, with over 4 times as many boys than girls diagnosed and treated for ADHD alone. Men make up to 75% of all suicides and 95% of the prison population. Depression is the leading cause of suicide across both genders. Women are twice as likely to suffer from depression, but men are 4 times more likely to take their own lives. So, I can temper that slightly and say that women outnumber men 2 to 1 in attempted suicides, but the stats for attempted suicides rely heavily on self-reported attempts. And as we know, men are less likely to report the fact that they have made an attempt or have been tempted to make an attempt. Men are also more likely to use violent methods, and among people who self-harm, men have a greater suicidal intent. So if we dig a little bit deeper academically, I did some reading, and there's an element of defensiveness in some of the research that I've noticed, and I noticed it in myself as well, as I came across study after study after study about women, and not very many studies about men. I think this is partly because women have been sidelined for so long under this patriarchal system that we have, but I think that in the pursuit of gender equality, and this is where it gets difficult, because there's a thinly veiled line between equality and diversity. But in the pursuit of gender equality, I think we've lost the chance of, well, haven't lost it forever, but at the moment we've lost the chance of learning more, not just about the diversity, but about why we are diverse. One study I read suggested that the reason that there's less research on men is because women see see men in black and white. We know our place in the world. We've used our natural urges for dominance and competitiveness to get our way for hundreds of years. So why study men? We know all there is to know about men. And I would argue that one of the reasons is that we've always looked at it from a biological standpoint and said, well, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. But actually, men are socialized differently from women. Boys are socialized differently from girls. We know that we use color to identify gender, and we've done that apparently since the 1800s. But we haven't done that just to identify gender. We've done that to identify the expected traits of a child. So, for instance, a strong, solid color would be used for boys, and a soft, pretty color or soft and delicate for girls. And if you look at girls' toys, for example, if you went onto Amazon and you just looked for girls' toys, you'll still find cleaning products and beauty products, and they'll all be pink or purple or pastel colors. If you look for boys' toys, they'll all be engineering, robots, guns, commandos, dress up as an army man, and they'll all be these strong, solid greens and blues and reds. So we are all still, as a society, giving our kids this subliminal information about what we expect them to be interested in, what we expect them to do, what we expect them to grow up to be. So this socialization is then borne out if you jump ahead 20 years and you look at the statistics on men and women working in science, technology, engineering and maths. You've got 86% men still and 24% women. If you look at the healthcare system, education and welfare, you've got 73% women and 27% men. So then I thought, well, what actually is the definition of masculinity? So I went into Google, which is the oracle of everything. And just to qualify it, I looked up where Google was getting its definitions from. Google gets its definitions from the American College Dictionary, which was established in 1947. So it's not some guy behind a computer going, hey, what's masculinity? Let me just type out something rubbish, right? So Google's definition, which is the American College Dictionary definition of masculinity, is this: having qualities or appearance traditionally associated with men, he is outstandingly handsome and robust, very masculine, in inverted commas, right? So it goes on to offer similar descriptives to help you understand the word more. And the words they give you are virile, macho, manly, all-male, muscly, strong, strapping, well-built, rugged, robust, brawny, powerful, red-blooded, vigorous, hunky, ripped, shredded, buff, jacked, mannish, manlike, unfeminine, unwomanly, unladylike, Amazonian, and butch. Then, if you haven't got it, right, they want you to really, really get this. They offer you traits that are the opposite of masculine. And the first thing that appears is weak. And then it goes on to say timid, feminine, and effeminate. So when you go to the other side and you look up feminine, the definition for feminine is this: having qualities or an appearance traditionally associated with women, especially delicacy and prettiness. Okay, then it gives you similar descriptors like it does for the men. They are womanly, ladylike, girlish, female, soft, delicate, gentle, tender, graceful, refined, modest, girly. Okay, and then just as they did with the masculine one, they give you then the opposite words for the opposite to help you really sort of sink in. The opposite that they give for feminine is masculine. So you might be sitting there and thinking, well, those aren't my definitions of masculine and feminine, and that's not what I teach my kids. And that may be very true. And I think that there have been massive changes in society, but as much as we have changed, we have also stayed the same. So I thought, well, let me do a Google search again, but for images of masculinity. And I might be able to pop this up on the video, but if I don't, just do a Google search and click on images for masculinity, and what comes up is what you would expect to come up, right? It's just these half-naked, ripped, buff men showing off their muscles. So for kids, if this is the image that we're giving them for boys, it's a very, very narrow definition of what it is to be a man. And I don't want this to be confused as talking about sexuality. I'm not talking about sexuality if you are more feminine, therefore you are gay, or more masculine, therefore you are more man. That's not what it is at all. And that's one of the problems that we have, that we don't accept that there's a spectrum of masculinity and femininity that doesn't have anything to do with your sexuality. It's just a very, very narrow definition that we're giving our boys. If you then look for the same images but for feminine on Google, you get a bunch more varied stuff. Yes, you do still get the odd girl in a swimsuit and mothers with babies, which is very stereotypical. But there's also a strength in the pictures. There's a strength in femininity, the power and how to claim it. But the images are in contrast to the message, suggesting that women don't have to abandon their femininity in order to be strong, as opposed to men who feel that they would need to abandon their strength in order to be anything but masculine. So when you look at all these things, you take everything into account. If you look back at, even at sort of when a woman is pregnant and the baby's kicking, and people say, oh, it must be a boy because it's full of energy, and there's this sort of expectation that a boy is going to be running around full of energy and chaotic. So even before birth, there's a character trait that we are projecting onto boys and to girls. And then you go through the color coding and the toys that we assume they're going to play with, and that sort of path that we lead them down that says this is how you're going to be. And then onto their careers, and then what they're seeing in films and what they are looking at on Google Images and magazine covers and their superheroes and all that sort of stuff, and what they have to aspire to in order to be a man, then it's not surprising that men struggle to access those parts of themselves that they don't feel as masculine, because we're not just asking them to do something different. We're actually asking them to be someone different. We're actually asking them to disidentify from their masculinity in order to reach out for help. That's a big ask for a boy or for a man, because to disidentify yourself, to lose your identity, it's almost like death to a lot of people. It's like, well, if I'm not masculine, if I'm not a man, then what am I? So, if society is saying, well, the opposite of masculinity is weakness, then who wants to be weak? No one wants to be weak. So you're actually asking someone to be weak. But at the same time, you're kind of saying, but it takes strength to ask for help. And that doesn't compute with men, because we've grown up with this idea that in order to be a man, we must be strong. And so when you are asking people to help, to reach out for help, and you can't understand why it is, and you're just thinking, oh, well, it's biological, that doesn't make any sense. So I think it's really important to recognize the role of socialization in gender diversity. We don't have to agree with it. We can wish that it was different, but we do have to recognize that it is a fact of life, and those stereotypes do exist for people. On the whole, men do find it more difficult to ask for help. They're less likely to be emotionally fluent, and they might prefer a more cognitive approach to things. But the campaigns and articles that I mentioned at the beginning that are trying to tackle this problem are in some ways cementing the stereotype and making it harder for men to access those parts of themselves, because they believe it's a inherent in their nature rather than a product of their socialization. I think if we ignore that part of the socialization part, rather than just looking at the biological part, if we ignore the socialization part, then we run the risk of missing out on really understanding the person and what is essentially a large part of the making of them.